Whatever you do, never say this poem out loud because if you do, you might die. There is a cursed Japanese poem called Tomino's Hell, and many people believe that if you read it out loud, you will die or be cursed for the rest of your life. One of these deaths was Shuji Terayama, who made a movie after this poem, and exactly 1 week after the movie was released, he suddenly just dropped dead to everybody's surprise. Another time, this college girl was dared by her friends to say the poem out loud. And she did, and exactly 1 week later, she suddenly just died. The poem is right here, and for it to even work, you have to read it in Japanese. So all of us English speakers are on the safe side. Or so I think, but I'm not reading this out loud in English either. Now, you can read it in your head and nothing will happen to you, but you literally cannot read it out loud. This is a very cursed poem in Japan, and many people believe it to be 100% real. So I don't know about you, but I'm not reading Tomino's Hell at all because I'm not risking anything.
This man held a death party for his wife and was charged with her murder, but that's not the craziest part of this case. It was 2019 in Minnesota. 58-year-old Dwayne Johnson was married to Deborah Lynn Johnson. Now, 68-year-old Deborah had been unwell for quite some time and was living in a nursing home. She was diabetic, she also had mental health issues, and she'd recently suffered from 2 heart attacks. Against medical advice, Dwayne took his wife out of the nursing home and the pair are both believed to have done substances together. Dwayne claimed to have thrown her a death party. He said they listened to their favourite song, Metal Health by Quiet Riot. A red message was also painted on the door. When police arrived at the property, Dwayne was nude and his wife's dead body was wrapped in a sheet surrounded by guns. An autopsy found that Deborah died from the substance M. Dwayne stated to police that he didn't tell anyone when she was dying because it was against her wishes. He was actually originally charged with murder charges and faced 25 years in prison. However, he pleaded guilty to neglect charges and was given just 3 years.
This town in Florida is home to around 150 sex offenders, and this includes rapists and pedophiles. So this is Miracle Village, Florida. It's out in the middle of nowhere surrounded by fields of sugarcane, and it was founded in 2009 by a local evangelical pastor. He wanted to provide a community where people who have been charged and convicted with these crimes can exist. So every single person that lives in this community has a disturbing story. Now, I think the kind of idea behind the community is a great idea and it can help foster some rehabilitation for these people, but when you look into these people's histories, it's just shocking. Now, the faces that I'm showing here aren't the people that these stories are about, but these are just some of the residents of the village, and I'm going to read to you a few of these quotes. When talking to Time magazine, one person said, "I had sex with my younger brother." Another person wrote that she got married to a man who abused her, which led her to molest her own children. And another member of this village said that they got in trouble for having a relationship with a 16-year-old when they were 18 years old. The girl's parents got involved, and that's what led to him going to prison. There are some really compelling documentaries about this place that you can find online if you want to. But why don't you let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this idea? Is it a good idea?
Each of these pictures have a backstory that will make you sick to your stomach, part 2. On August 1st, 2009, Delilah Dippolito, who is on the right of this picture, got into the passenger seat of a red sedan for a secret meeting and told the driver she wanted him to kill her husband, who was on the left. She offered him $7,000 and he responded that he already bought the gun. They agreed on a date and time when she would be at the gym to establish an alibi. When Delilah arrived home after her workout on the day of the planned murder, her house was a crime scene. Police told her that her husband was dead and she broke down in tears right there in the street. Officers consoled her and then took her to the station for a debriefing and explanation. There, she continued to sob in horror and disbelief until the man she believed to be dead came out from behind a doorway. The whole operation had been a setup. The hitman was an undercover cop and her husband himself was in on the sting, with the entire situation being recorded for an episode of Cops. What I'm about to show you is Delilah's reaction coming back from the gym and finding out her husband is dead. Or at least to her, and keep in mind, she orchestrated this whole thing. Just watch her acting here.
Listen, we had a report of a disturbance at your house, and there were shots fired. Is your husband Michael? Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, man. He's been killed. He's been killed, man. I'm sorry.
No, he's not. No.
try to calm down. Listen, right now, we need to get you to the station. We need to get you to the police station. I can't let you in, man. We have to do our job.
The allegations against Tyler Carter from the band Issues are disturbing. And I remember when these all came out a few years ago, but I hadn't really read into them until today. So if you don't know the band Issues, they're a big metalcore metal alternative band. And I remember in high school, I used to love them for their style of music. I loved all of their albums. I loved their music. But in 2020, a number of disturbing allegations came out about their frontman, Tyler Carter. Now, one of the initial allegations came from the singer of a band called Misfortune. They claimed that Tyler had tried to seduce them into sleeping with them. They had tried to groom them. They stated that they told Tyler many times that they were straight, but that Tyler continued to press on, trying to force them into doing something with him, and eventually they buckled in and did it. They also alleged that Tyler would kind of bully them about their vocals and gaslight them all the time. And at around that same time, another man came forward and said that Tyler Carter had groomed them when they were a minor, and that Tyler had SA'd them, if you know what I mean. So Tyler actually took to social media and kind of admitted to doing some of the things. He said that he'd made a lot of mistakes. He should never have shown interest in people younger than him. He also said he was sorry for those that he hurt. He tried to blame all of this on drugs and alcohol. But before long, only a few days after these allegations came out, the band Issues completely severed their ties with Tyler. And although no formal charges were ever brought against him, I've always wondered what the reality is behind this situation.
This case was described as the UK version of Madeleine McCann. It was the 19th of February 2008. The locals in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire were rocked by the news of a missing local girl. 9-year-old Shannon Matthews had been reported missing by her mum. At 6:48 p.m. on the day in question, Shannon's mum, Karen, had rung police to say that her daughter had not returned home from school. The school was about half a mile away from her home. Now, this is obviously incredibly concerning. Over 200 police officers were called in to start looking for the child. Karen appeared on the news begging whoever had Shannon to return her. A £50,000 reward was offered by a newspaper, and the disappearance was likened to that of Madeleine McCann. Police started looking into whoever could have taken this little girl. Now, it eventually came to light that there were multiple reports that Karen's children were often unkempt, neglected, and left home alone. Behind the scenes, police started to look into the family. Meanwhile, a neighbour of Michael Donovan phoned the police. Shannon had been living with her mum, Karen, and her boyfriend Craig in a deprived area. Now, Michael was actually Craig's uncle. They reported hearing children's footsteps in Michael's property, which was strange as he didn't have kids. On the 14th of March, Michael's home was searched. Police were stunned to find Shannon alive in the property. She had been missing for a total of 24 days and had been kept under the bed at this house. She was tied up, and Michael gained control of her by subduing her with substances. It was soon revealed that the whole thing had been planned by Shannon's mum. Karen was trying to gain reward money from the press. Karen and Michael were both sentenced to 8 years in prison.
Can we please take a second to talk about Mark Wahlberg's 9/11 comments? I cannot believe that he actually said this. So in February of 2012, Mark Wahlberg was interviewed by Men's Health magazine. That's when he made these comments. If you guys don't know, Mark Wahlberg was actually supposed to be on one of the flights that crashed into the World Trade Center. Obviously, you guys know the story of 9/11, but Mark Wahlberg was actually scheduled to be on the first flight that crashed into the World Trade Center, Flight 11. He stayed up super late the night before, overslept, missed his plane, and fortunately missed out on boarding that flight. But obviously his story could have ended there. He could have just said he was so thankful and appreciative that he wasn't on the flight, but that's not what he said. In his interview with Men's Health magazine, this is what Mark Wahlberg said. If I was on that plane with my kids, it wouldn't have went down like it did. There would have been a lot of blood in that first class cabin, and then me saying, okay, we're going to land somewhere safely, don't worry. So obviously when this interview came out, people could not believe that he was saying that he would have been able to single-handedly save that plane from crashing into the World Trade Center. People thought it was grossly offensive that he made this statement, and obviously it was. After he received a lot of backlash, Mark Wahlberg backtracked his comments and issued an apology, but I still just cannot believe that he actually said that.
This Lidl employee has been given a life sentence for planning a UK mass shooting. 32-year-old Reed had written out a 1,700-word document detailing his plan of attack and listing who he was going to kill. He'd planned to first attack his old primary school, the Priory in Whalley, and kill the teachers that had wronged him. He said his plan would then culminate in an attack on Avon and Somerset Police Headquarters, where he would detonate pressure cooker bombs before opening fire on police with his homemade machine guns. Police received an anonymous tip-off in November 2022, and they went to the house that Reed shared with his father. They found several weapons, body armour, a police uniform, thousands of bullets, and materials to make bombs and guns. But before he could be escorted out of his house, he asked to use the bathroom. What the police didn't realise was that he was retrieving a gun. He fired at the officers and they fired back, and Reed was shot 3 times. It was then several months before he could be questioned, as he needed lengthy hospital treatment. He admitted being obsessed with mass shootings such as Columbine and Dunblane, and he said that he wanted to get revenge on everyone that had caused him stress and worry over the years. He smiled throughout his entire interview, especially when he was talking about his homemade guns, which are apparently his pride and joy. At his trial, Judge Picton said that he was obsessed with firearms and explosives, and only a life sentence would be appropriate. Reed will have to serve a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole.
This is by far the worst thing that ever happened at a sports event, and it's extremely sad. Shannon Stone, a 39-year-old firefighter from Brownwood, Texas, tragically fell headfirst out of the stands during a baseball game at Rangers Stadium. He was attempting to catch a ball that was tossed to him by Rangers outfielder Josh Hamilton. Shannon Stone approximately fell 20 feet before landing on the concrete below. And despite being conscious after the fall, he went into cardiac arrest soon afterward and was pronounced dead within an hour. The incident occurred while he was at the game with his young son, who witnessed the whole thing happen in front of him. This is just so sad because Josh Hamilton wanted to give a young fan who was Shannon's son something that he could cherish forever, which is a baseball game ball. But Josh Hamilton could have never guessed that this gesture could have turned out so bad. Another sad thing about this case is when Shannon Stone was on the stretcher, he told the people helping him, "Please check on my son is up there all by himself," which he was because they only came to the game together. This father and son went to a baseball game as every father and son do to bond and have a good time. But instead it turned into a nightmare for both Shannon and his son. You can see Shannon's son in the video, who is standing up right behind him as he reaches over and catches the ball. And as you can see, this happened right in front of his eyes. But in memory of Shannon Stone, the Texas Rangers honored him with a bronze statue at the stadium, depicting him and his 6-year-old son Cooper at a Rangers game. Tragedies like this serve as a reminder that accidents can happen anywhere and anytime, even on a day out at a baseball park, so we all have to be aware of everything. This is just such a sad case, and I feel so bad for Cooper, and may Shannon Stone rest in peace.
This true crime case proves you should never believe everything that you hear. It was the 1st of December 1996 on a rural road in Worcestershire. It was pitch black outside and a local man heard a scream. Now, despite being obviously terrified, he actually ran to where the scream was coming from because he thought someone was in danger. When he got to the car, he had a horrific shock. There was an injured woman and a man who had been stabbed to death. The pair were actually a couple, Tracy Andrews and Lee Harvey. They'd been together since October '94, and they'd actually moved in with each other just months after they met. Tracy told the local man at the side of the road that they'd been involved in a road rage incident. They'd been on their way back from the pub, and Tracy actually had 2 black eyes. Tragically, Lee was deceased at the scene. Police were called and a huge hunt was underway to find the mystery road rage killer. Now, as part of a public appeal to try and find out any information about this case, Tracy took part in a press conference. However, bizarrely, she seemed to show a lot of compassion towards the killer of her partner. She also seemed to be contradicting her original story. Police grew really suspicious of Tracy. A witness of the house nearby also claimed to have not seen any other car involved. Another witness claimed to have heard an argument between a man and a woman. There were also, interestingly, no tyre marks indicating that another car had been involved in this incident. 2 other witnesses stated that they'd seen the car Lee and Tracy were driving in, but no other car following it. Tracy's story suddenly started unravelling. It was revealed that the relationship between the pair had been actually quite volatile. Tracy had been violent towards Lee on more than one occasion, and she was very aggressive and controlling. Just to add to this, a penknife-shaped bloodstain was also found in Tracy's car, and she was actually eventually charged with his murder. She did finally admit to this, and she was sentenced to 14 years in prison.
This man has a family of mannequins, and it's going to be one of the most unsettling things you will ever see. A man with a family of mannequins went viral recently and earned various reactions online after the story behind his strange behavior has been revealed. A man from Colombia named Christian Montney had become an internet sensation after photos of him and his family of mannequins went viral on social media. However, the story behind his unique family is not one of joy, but rather a tragedy of mental illness. According to the posts, Christian allegedly suffers from delusional disorder, a condition that causes him to have difficulty distinguishing between what is real and what is imaginary. This disorder has apparently led him to create a family of mannequins which he treats as if they were alive. In the photos I've been showing, Christian can be seen posing with his mannequin wife, who he named Natalia Ortiz, and his 2 mannequin children. He has even created a separate social media account for Natalia where he uploads photos of them together as if they were a real family. Many people who have seen the photos have expressed concerns for Christian's mental health, with many speculating that he may be suffering from objectophilia, a condition where a person feels a romantic attraction to an inanimate object or objects. However, there are also posts circulating online that suggest Christian's obsession with mannequins may be rooted because of a tragic event that occurred in his life, with many speculating that his family or loved ones may have been involved in something terrifying. This case is just extremely unsettling and weird because I've made many true crime case videos about people who turn their victims into mannequins and keep them as souvenirs. Now, he's not doing that, but mannequins and true crime have never gone well together. I hope Christian figures out whatever it is he needs to, and let me know your thoughts on this whole thing.
This is Brian Stars, one of the most hated men in the alternative world. So if you don't know who Brian Stars was, he was a person who interviewed a lot of alternative bands. He was always at Warped Tour, and he ran the YouTube series My Digital Escape. This content factory had a lot of people that worked for it and were involved with it, including Johnny Gilbert and a friend of mine, Kyle David Hall. And they produced videos for the scene crowd. They were funny, they were skits, they were sketches, but a lot of the people that were involved in the production of these videos began to question the content eventually, and that's when some of these weird allegations came out. So even though Brian knew that his audience was predominantly 12 to 15-year-old girls, he made these hypersexualized videos all the time. This included a video where he had a creator who had previously been assaulted in the past get slapped in the face by a toy, if you know what I mean. She went on the record afterwards and said that this was grossly disgusting. And one creator that was involved with this, named Hey There, I'm Shannon, claimed that he was selling unaliving with how graphic and disgusting some of his videos were for the audience they were appealing to. It also should be noted that one member of the MDE team initially was Austin Jones. Now, Austin was also invited to Warped Tour. I actually made a TikTok previously covering this guy's entire story, and he's one of the creepiest creeps ever to hit the scene. This creep was actually arrested and sent to prison. Yes, he's still in prison for making underage girls produce CP for him. I mean, just read this chat. I mean, it's just disgusting what this guy was doing. And Brian Stars actually covered for Austin Jones. He had his back when all these charges came out. So that's something that people were initially super pissed at this guy for. But so many members of his previous team and the kind of community have come out against Brian Stars. They've said that he was really creepy with them. One content creator even said that Brian wanted to reenact a grape scene with him. And yeah, I feel like a lot of these alternative people that were really in the scene, sadly, have these massive downfalls. And Brian Stars was definitely not immune to his.
This girl vanished from a phone box, and what her parents found next will haunt them forever. It was 1999 in Gainesville, Georgia. 18-year-old Elaine Nix had big dreams of one day becoming a nurse. She was currently working as a waitress, and she had a boyfriend named Billy, and she lived with her parents. Now, the couple lived around half an hour away from each other, so every night they would talk on the phone. Now, this was obviously way before everybody had mobile phones, so they would do this via a landline. The calls actually ended up costing Elaine's mum quite a lot of money, so she did say to Elaine that she wasn't allowed to ring him as frequently anymore. Tragically, this would prove to be an even more costly mistake. Elaine had to find a different way to contact Billy that wouldn't cost her mum a lot of money, so she started going to a local phone box. Every night at 11 p.m, she would go to the phone box and ring him. Now, one evening, the couple had actually been in an argument, so Elaine went to the said phone box to ring him and sort things out. They resolved the issue and ended the call. However, Elaine would never make it home. Records show that Elaine hung up the phone at 10 past 12. Now, initially, Elaine's family weren't that concerned because it was quite regular that she would just go and stay at somebody else's house for the evening. However, she also then didn't turn up at her job the next day, which was very unusual. Her parents decided to go to the phone box and search around the local area, and they did actually make a worrying discovery. Elaine's car was there with her handbag inside and the key in the ignition. Now, her mum actually, just spur of the moment, decided to drive Elaine's car home. Now, that actually completely contaminated any potential crime scene. 9 days after her disappearance, a local man actually found Elaine's nude deceased body. She was in a fetal position by a disused industrial park. Now, as Elaine had actually been there for quite a while, it was really difficult to determine how she died. Now, strangely, it was later revealed that at 2 a.m. on the night that Elaine vanished, a police officer had actually noticed her car. He had apparently inspected the car, felt that nothing was off, and had just left. So who on earth killed Elaine? Was it somebody who had been watching her movements and knew that she would regularly be at that phone box? Was it an opportunist who randomly stumbled across Elaine that evening? Was it someone Elaine knew, or maybe that police officer had something to do with it? Tragically, Elaine's murder remains unsolved to this day.
White House GIF. I don't know if you ever heard about this.
I never heard about the White House GIF, but I heard about like GIFs,
GIFs,
whatever.
yeah. And I got this from a YouTuber. He's the one that first talked about it, so I want to give him his credits. Lazy Masquerade. It's very, very eerie and disturbing once you know like the backstory to everything. We already know how those scary videos, curse videos were really popular back in the day. They would pop up. We would send them to people. This one wasn't as popular, but it was mostly associated with a video called Why You Never Became a Dancer.
So that's just the whole video?
A song by a band called White House. The song or whatever had nothing to do with the image it was showing, and the identity of the woman remained unknown for like a really long time. So it wasn't until June of last year that they found out who she really was, and a lot of people thought it was fake until a Reddit user, his name was Lane Campbell 77, ended up posting on his Reddit thread that he found a book that was about a Japanese serial killer. His name was Kiyoshi Akubo. He was one of Japan's most notorious serial killers. He had killed 8 victims, one of them being that girl. And her name was Reiko Takemura. One day he had picked her up, the same thing that he did to everybody else, asked her if she wanted to be a model so he could paint. When in this car, Kiyoshi got the impression that Reiko,
She liked him.
Kiyoshi tried to say that let's go back to like a motel. Reiko was saying, do you really think I'm that type of girl? Later on, they ended up going through this forest road and he tried to force himself onto her. She obviously slapped him. She tried to run away. He caught up to her. He strangled her to death. The only reason he was caught was because of Reiko's brother. He made it his mission to find Kiyoshi. It was just one night where
This chilling case will put you off ever going on Tinder again. It was December 2018 and Grace Millane had had a fantastic year. She was backpacking around New Zealand, which is something she'd always dreamed of doing. She was really enjoying her gap year after graduating from the University of Lincoln. She'd gained a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing and was clearly very intelligent. She was looking to meet new people in the new local area and was browsing on Tinder. One evening, she had a Tinder date with 26-year-old Jessie Kempson. It was actually the evening before her birthday, so she was in the mood to celebrate. Grace was really enjoying herself and the pair were getting on well. She even texted her friends to say how well they were getting on and that he seemed to have a really good job and was living in a hotel. This was tragically the last time her friends would ever hear from her. Now, the following day, it was obviously her birthday, so her friends and family flooded social media with birthday wishes. Everyone was texting her to wish her a happy 22nd birthday. However, alarm bells started to ring when she didn't respond. When nobody heard from her in a full 2 days, the police got involved. Now, luckily there was a lot of CCTV from the evening that Grace went missing. Police found footage of her and Jessie going in a lift together and going to his room. Chillingly, Grace never reappears. CCTV then captured Jessie going to the shops and buying cleaning equipment and even renting a professional carpet cleaning machine. He then took a suitcase out of the room, into the lift and out of the hotel. Now, shockingly, Jessie actually went on another Tinder date that evening, and the girl who went on the date said she got really creepy vibes from him. She said that he was just kind of talking in a really disturbing way. Eventually, Jessie admitted to killing Grace. He claimed, though, that it was part of a consensual act gone wrong. This story, though, unravelled when police found really disturbing images that Jesse had taken of Grace after she was unalive. When the case went to trial, Jesse's internet search history was revealed. This really just illustrated the kind of person that he was. Now, as for the suitcase that Jesse removed from the hotel, Grace was actually inside this, and he had buried her in the suitcase. Her body was discovered on the 9th of December. Jesse was found guilty unanimously and sentenced to life in prison.
This story should serve as some sort of a warning. So back in 2020, this news story surfaced online and it had people pretty disturbed. This is Caitlin Ann Reston. She was an American teenager, and before her death, she claimed that she was a Wiccan. Now, Caitlin was a part of a group on social media that practiced spells and witchcraft. But according to reports online, Caitlin and her girlfriend had recently split up, so Caitlin got heavily into voodoo to try spite her. Keep in mind, this is all information that's just online. I'm trying to be as accurate as possible with this story. So Caitlin's Twitter is actually still up, and you can see this eerie post that she made just a few weeks before her death. So Caitlin had started to get into arguments with people online about her practicing voodoo. That's when she made this tweet telling people to stop telling her what she can do and what she can believe in. But allegedly, it's at this point when Caitlin tried to summon or talk to a Loa in voodoo called Papa Legba. So Papa Legba is a very powerful Loa. He's commonly invoked in the practice. He's said to stand at the spiritual crossroads and give people permission or deny them from talking to spirits. And he usually appears as an old man with a crutch or a cane and a straw hat of sorts, usually smoking a pipe or drinking some dark rum. Now, some of you might recognize these images I have on screen. That's because Papa Legba was a character in the 3rd season of American Horror Story, Coven. Now, I want to add in here that Papa Legba is not some evil demon thing that's coming to kill people. But this story could be a very cautionary tale if this actually happened. So in April of 2020, Caitlin posted on her Facebook after trying to contact Papa Legba that she had seen him that day and was scared. Posts from her social media show that yes, she indeed did attempt a ritual to summon Papa Legba. And then just a few days later, she died. As it turns out, Caitlin had died in a freak accident and had drowned in her bathtub. Now, we obviously don't know Caitlin's medical information. We have no real way to verify exactly how she died. Sadly, Caitlin would be the only one who would be able to tell us that. But after this story broke in the news and the details of what Caitlin was doing before her unfortunate and bizarre death, it obviously spread like wildfire. And I don't know if we'll truly ever really know what happened, but this is definitely a dark and cautionary tale.
This is the sinkhole incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This was Jeffrey Bush, who lived in Florida. And he lived in a home with his brother, his sister-in-law, and his niece. The house was built in the 1970s, and there was never any indication that there was anything wrong with the house. But on the night of February 28th, 2013, Jeffrey Bush was sleeping in his room when all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, Jeffrey's brother Jeremy heard his brother screaming. They heard him screaming for help and also heard some really loud crashing noises. And when Jeremy got to the room and looked inside, Jeffrey was gone. His bed was gone, his dresser was gone, his TV was gone, because a massive sinkhole opened up in Jeffrey's room and swallowed everything inside. At the time, Jeremy said the sinkhole was about 20 feet wide and roughly 6 to 7 feet deep. And Jeremy, not thinking of anything, just jumped into the hole to see if he could find his brother. He said he thought he heard his brother calling his name and screaming for help, but he couldn't actually see Jeffrey anywhere. It was just a dark chasm with Jeffrey's furniture and water pouring in everywhere. Within minutes, firefighters and rescue workers were there. And because sinkholes are so unpredictable, the rescuers just pulled Jeremy out immediately. And they all then left the house. In fact, the sinkhole was still crumbling. The first thing the rescue team did was get a microphone and put it onto a string, and they then put it into the sinkhole to see if they could hear any sounds of life. But they didn't hear a thing. But as they were doing this, the sinkhole collapsed again, and at that point it spread to be about 30 feet wide and about 20 feet deep, which is just crazy. There was no safe way of trying to see if they can even save Jeffrey Bush's life, or recover a body if he was dead. I don't know and they don't know how long he survived, but based on the fact that he was screaming for help, means he was likely alive for a few minutes before being crushed to death or suffocating. It was literally impossible to get his body. They then tore down the home and built a fence around where the sinkhole is, and then poured it with a bunch of asphalt, burying Jeffrey forever. They also said there's a slim chance his body could get picked up by a nearby waterway, but it's extremely unlikely. 2 years later, the sinkhole reopened and they then had to demolish all the homes around it. This death is absolutely terrifying and may Jeffrey Bush rest in peace.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This disturbing image key to solving the mystery of a missing woman. It was January 2006 and Jennifer Kessie was living in Orlando, Florida. She was a beautiful, successful 24-year-old woman with a bright future ahead of her. She just actually purchased her own property and been promoted at work. She went missing on the 23rd of the month. The last time she was seen, she left work at 6 p.m. and spoke to her dad on the phone while driving home until around 6:15. It's reported that that day she also spoke to her boyfriend at around 10 p.m. Now, it was actually routine for Jennifer to actually ring her boyfriend every single morning or at least send him a text. So when she didn't contact him the next morning, he got concerned. He tried to call her, but the phone went straight to voicemail. She also didn't show up at work that day. Her boss ended up calling her parents. When they went to her condo to investigate, they found proof that she'd actually got ready for work that morning. There was a wet towel there as if she'd just actually recently showered to get ready. However, her car was missing. Worryingly, on the 26th of January, her car was found abandoned. It was in a nearby car park about a mile away from her house. The car appeared to have been wiped down and there were no fingerprints. Chilling CCTV images captured a person of interest walking past just after the car is believed to have been abandoned. Frustratingly, the individual is almost completely obstructed in both images. Jennifer's phone, keys, iPod, and purse have never been found. Now, one theory is that the person responsible for her disappearance was maybe a construction worker working on the condos. She had told her friends and family that there were workers in the apartment block that she lived in that did make her feel uncomfortable. Some witnesses reported seeing construction workers disposing of a carpet from one of the apartments. They were then seen replacing that carpet with a new one, which obviously could be completely innocent, but is also very suspicious. Tragically, Jennifer remains missing to this day.
You may think you've been screwed over by a friend before, but I promise you have never been screwed over like William Burke. William Burke lived in a lodging house owned by his best friend, William Hare. Now, the two men and their wives, they were known to be wild partiers, drinkers, hellraisers, and the lodging house that they all lived in kind of became a hub for that kind of lifestyle. Parties, alcohol, anything you can imagine, that was the place to be in Edinburgh, Scotland, 1827. And one night, one of the lodgers that lived in this lodging house died. And William Hare was immediately pissed off about this because this tenant still owed him £4 worth of back rent. And well, one day, William Hare was complaining to his best friend, William Burke, about this problem. And he's like, where am I going to get that £4 worth of back rent? And the two got to talking and they came up with a horrific solution. During this time, the practice of surgery and the study of anatomy was booming, and Edinburgh, Scotland was a hub for this science. And the universities were always looking for cadavers and fresh bodies to cut open and study. However, Scottish law had put a bunch of stipulations and red tape around what kind of bodies could be used, and this created a cadaver shortage. And due to this shortage, professors and students started purchasing bodies from grave robbers for 8 to 10 pounds a body. And so William Hare and William Burke decided they were going to sell the body of their dead tenant to a university professor, and they got £7 for it. And the two guys were like, hey, that wasn't a bad day's work. And to make a long story short, William Burke and William Hare brought their wives in on the business, and they became serial killers in this area, killing off their patrons and selling the bodies to universities. Finally, some patrons started getting suspicious about the patrons that were disappearing, and so they started poking around, and they came across the body of a woman who had been seen partying with William Burke and William Hare the night before. The police were called, both men and their wives were arrested, and police offered William Hare a deal. They said, hey, if you confess to the crimes and you give us a story, we'll let you walk scot-free. And the coward, William Hare, starts singing like a bird. He tells the whole story, how they killed their patrons, sold the bodies, everything. And he pinned it all on his friend William Burke. William Hare was released and he was escorted to the English border for safety, and William Burke was hanged and his body was dissected and put on display. What's the worst you've ever been screwed over by a friend? Let me know in the comments, and if you made it this far into the video, leave a tiger and a donut in the comments so I know who my true fans are. Like and follow. Bye.
Remains of a child were recently found encased in concrete in a Colorado storage unit, and now police are searching for 2 other missing children possibly connected to the case. This needs a massive trigger warning because the details of this case are horrifying. On the morning of January 10th, police were called to the King Storage Center in downtown Pueblo, Colorado, after someone found a suspicious metal container in one of the units filled with hardened concrete. The unit was being cleared out after whoever owned it stopped paying rent, and when authorities arrived and searched the metal container, they found the remains of a child encased in concrete. No information has been released about the child's identity or how or when they died, but police did say that the metal container appeared to be newer. For reasons currently unknown, this somehow led police to begin the search for 2 other missing children in the area in connection to the homicide investigation. They are siblings Jesus and Yesenia Dominguez, and they were last seen nearly 6 years ago in the summer of 2018. Jesus was 5 at the time and Yesenia was 3, and after July of that year, they vanished. They would now be around 9 or 10 years old. So far, the Pueblo Police Department has not confirmed how these 2 children are connected to the remains of the other child found in the storage unit, but they are hoping to find the kids safe. Police have talked with the parents of the missing children, and what's odd is the fact that the kids are actively missing, but their parents haven't once reported them missing. According to Sergeant Ortega with the Pueblo Police, although there was never an official missing persons report filed in regards to the 2 missing children, the department was called a few times in the past to conduct welfare checks on them. But he also said that authorities could never locate the children, and when asked why they never followed up or tried to locate them, Sergeant Ortega said that there were custody issues involving the kids and that he could not provide any further information. Since the discovery of the remains in the storage unit, police have questioned 2 people of interest in regards to the homicide, but as of today, no one has been charged with the crime. Adding to the mystery surrounding this case, police have not confirmed if the 2 persons of interest are the missing children's parents. The Pueblo County coroner will identify the child's remains, which will be released to the public once the family is properly notified. What's incredibly sad is the fact that the storage unit where the remains were found is right across the street from the Dennis Mays Judicial Building, yet no one there knew the horrors laying right across from them. If you have any information regarding this case or the disappearance of Jesus and Yesenia, please contact Detective Nicholas Lyle at 719-601-7751. Or you can remain anonymous and contact the Pueblo Crime Stoppers at 719-542-7867.
What would you do if you saw a young girl running partially clothed from someone's house and then get pinned to the ground? It was November 2015. Kaylee Hayward was a 15-year-old girl from Measham in Leicestershire. She was a friendly girl who was very trusting of others, but unfortunately this would leave her open to exploitation. She'd recently got close with someone she'd met online, and the pair were talking frequently. One message chillingly stated, "I wish I could kidnap you for Christmas, but I would probably be arrested and sent to prison." The pair exchanged a total of 2,643 texts before tragedy struck. Now, eerily, it was actually Friday the 13th, and Kaylee asked her dad to take her to the local community college. She told her dad that she was going to meet a friend there. She was staying away for the whole weekend and would be back on Sunday. Later that night, she texted her friend stating, "Help." Now, her friend was obviously concerned by this, as you would be, and texted Kaylee back asking what was wrong. And then she got a text back from Kaylee's phone stating that she'd merely meant to put hello. It would later transpire that the second text message did not come from Kaylee. Now, on Sunday, Kaylee's concerned parents contacted the police after she failed to come home. They were also unable to reach her via her phone. It would soon become clear why. On the 17th of November, a member of the public found Kaylee's phone completely smashed up next to the road. Kaylee, however, was still nowhere to be found. That was until heartbreakingly the day after the teenager's body was found in a local field. She'd been horrifically beaten and assaulted. It was later revealed that Kaylee had been targeted online by local man Luke Harlow. Now remember, she's 15. He was actually 27. He groomed her and plied her with alcohol. His neighbour, 29-year-old Stephen Beedman, also came over to the house after he'd received a text stating that a bird was round. In the early hours of Sunday morning, a neighbour witnessed Kaylee run from the house, partially clothed, and be pinned to the ground. They identified the person that had pinned her to the ground as Stephen. Stephen later confessed to R-ing the teenager and then killing her with a brick. When interviewed by officers, he stated, "When I drink, I just switch. But when I switch, I get violent. I wasn't in full control because I'd been drinking." Stephen was given life in prison and died in April 2021 behind bars. Luke only actually got 12 years despite the discovery that he'd also groomed 2 other underage girls online.
This American couple was just kidnapped by 3 escaped prisoners after their boat was violently hijacked in the Caribbean. And what you're about to see is the graphic footage of one of the suspects being arrested. This is Ralph Hendry and Kathy Brandel, a married couple of 27 years. The couple had been living on their yacht named Simplicity since 2013 after retiring and selling their house in Falls Church, Virginia. Ralph and Kathy were spending the winter sailing the eastern part of the Caribbean when their boat was found abandoned on February 21st near the island of St. Vincent. Another boater stumbled across the boat, and when they started looking around, they found evidence of severe violence and contacted the Coast Guard and the police. When authorities entered the boat, they discovered that it was completely ransacked. Items were strewn all over the deck and cabin, and a substantial amount of blood was found on the boat, leaving behind chilling evidence of a violent struggle. The only thing that authorities did not find were Ralph and Kathy. During the initial investigation, police found that the couple were last seen alive on February 18th by their boating neighbors at a dock at the Grand Anse Beach in Grenada, which is a popular tourist destination. When the neighbors woke up the next day, the couple and their boat were gone. Authorities were then notified that on that same day, which was February 19th, these 3 men escaped from the St. George police station nearby. They're officially identified as 19-year-old Traven Robertson, 25-year-old Abita Stanislaus, and 30-year-old Ron Mitchell. They were initially being held for various charges, which included rape and robbery, and they left behind a violent crime spree before being arrested. According to the Grenadines police force, after the 3 men escaped, they then violently hijacked Kathy and Ralph's boat, kidnapped them, and then presumably killed them based on the evidence found on their yacht. The prisoners are then believed to have thrown the couple's bodies overboard while they sailed to St. Vincent, which is where the boat was ultimately found. As of today, March 7th, Kathy and Ralph's bodies have still not been found, but police do believe that they are likely dead and are currently searching for them by air and sea between the islands of Grenada and St. Vincent. As for the escaped prisoners, all 3 were captured on February 21st after a large manhunt, and they've all reportedly confessed in some way to killing the couple. They're all currently being held, although at the moment, none of them have been charged with crimes against Kathy or Ralph, and how exactly the men escaped in the first place is still under investigation. Kathy and Ralph were experienced sailors who were part of a boating group called Salty Dog Sailing Association, and sadly, the day their boat was found was Kathy's birthday. She would have turned 71. Although the couple have a low probability of being found according to the police, they're still holding out hope that they're out there alive somewhere.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
This is the skydiving incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This is 18-year-old Tyler Turner, who just graduated high school. In 2016, Tyler and a group of his friends wanted to experience a thrill. So they all decided to go skydiving for the first time. And unfortunately for Tyler, it would be his first and his last. This was a video taken moments before Tyler went skydiving.
My name is Tyler Turner. What did I do here? I am gonna jump out of a plane. It's your first time. First time indeed. His mom Francine was there to see him off. That's my mom. Hello. Hey, loving mom. Don't want me in my life. Or that she'll help me with more of my life. Because I want to make it.
That video is the final time Tyler would ever talk to his mom. The plane went up in the air and one by one people were jumping out of it. Tyler would be doing a tandem skydive with this instructor. Later, it would come out that he wasn't even certified and all of his documents were forged. Tyler's mother was waiting 13,000 feet below, waiting for her son to come down. Tyler and his instructor jumped out of the plane, and all his mother really could see is just tiny dots in the sky. But the more and more people that come down, she still hasn't seen her son. As Tyler and his instructor were coming down to the earth, the worst possible thing happened. The instructor pulled the ripcord, but the parachute didn't come out. The backup parachutes didn't work either. All of the parachutes failed. And I could assume when this happened, both of them started to panic. They were falling at roughly 200 feet per second, which is insane. And that means without a parachute, it would take 70 to 80 seconds to fall down to the earth. Which for them, I imagine, felt like hours and hours. And all while this is happening, Tyler's mother is still looking up in the air, waiting for her son. And because of the freefall aspect, they have gone off course. So they were no longer falling in the exact area they were supposed to. About a minute to a minute and a half later, after they jumped out of the plane, and at roughly 100 to 120 miles per hour, they crashed into the earth. I couldn't find any autopsy report about their death, but all I could hope is they had some sort of heart failure before they hit the ground, because experiencing that must be absolutely horrific. Tyler's mother filed a lawsuit against the skydiving company and she won $40 million for her son's death. But sadly, she is forever without her son. This is just so sad because before Tyler went skydiving, he literally said in the video that he was scared and he hopes he makes it. And his mother was there when this all happened. I can't imagine the pain she was feeling, and may Tyler Turner rest in peace.
Imagine your family attending your funeral when you're still alive. This horrifying mistake caused a family to hold a funeral for their loved one who had not died. Another family believed that their deceased loved one was still alive. On the 26th of April 2006, two families' lives would be changed forever. Laura Van Ryn and Whitney Kerrick were both students at Taylor University in Indiana. The pair looked remarkably similar, with blonde hair and blue eyes. They did know each other from university and had worked at a few banquets together. That evening, the pair were travelling back to campus around 8 p.m. in their school van. Tragically, a lorry driver lost control of the lorry and hurtled towards their vehicle. The school van was torn open and launched passengers into the air. The impact instantly killed 5 passengers. The lorry driver later went on to be convicted of criminal negligence and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The rescue scene was chaotic, and in the panic it was difficult for emergency services to identify survivors. They were able to spot a blonde female who was struggling to breathe. They identified her as Laura and she was airlifted to a hospital. Families of Laura and Whitney were notified of the horror crash. Whitney's mum got a heartbreaking call to inform her that her daughter had passed away. Laura's family were told that she was alive, but heavily bandaged, swollen, and in a coma. Whitney's heartbroken family set about planning her funeral. Over 1,400 people attended the service to pay respects to Whitney and celebrate her life. After 11 days in the hospital and undergoing multiple surgeries, Laura began to make progress. Her boyfriend visited her in hospital and noticed her eyes seemed more green than usual. However, due to her injuries and how swollen and battered she was, she overall just looked a lot different. Laura was undergoing intensive rehab due to her brain injury. During a therapy session, her doctor asked her to write her name, to which she wrote Whitney. Later on, she was also heard muttering the words false parents, which only caused more concern. Now bear in mind, Laura's family don't know Whitney at this point. However, when Laura's family discovered a CD of Whitney's memorial, they were stunned to see the girl's picture. The girl in the photo was clearly the girl in the hospital bed. It transpired that Laura's purse and ID had been next to Whitney when she was recovered from the crash site. Clearly, this was a horrifying case of mistaken identity. After 5 weeks of her family believing that Laura was making progress in the hospital, her family had to come to terms with the fact that she'd actually died 5 weeks prior. When Whitney's family heard the news, they rushed to the hospital. Seeing her daughter in the hospital bed and not deceased, Whitney's mum was screaming and crying. When Whitney recovered, she found the survivor guilt incredibly hard to deal with. The two families bonded over the tragedy, and they've even written a book together about their trauma.
This woman literally devoted her whole life to her only child. She supported him, she stuck up for him when no one else would. So how did he repay her? by stealing her money and then bludgeoning her to death when she decided to confront him. Judith had become suspicious of her son Dale, and she'd noted her concerns down in a diary. He'd actually received a caution from police in 2001 after embezzling money from her savings account, but she decided not to press charges. By the time 2020 came around, Dale was now in his 40s and he was still stealing money from Judith. She'd noted down in her diary things like drug addiction, lies, stealing money, referring to Dale. Towards the end of 2020, with most of Wales locked down due to COVID-19, Dale was living with Judith, and this is when he did the unthinkable. It's thought that at the beginning of December, Judith had confronted Dale about his lies and stealing. He'd picked up a hammer and hit her round the head, not once, not twice, but 14 times, until she was slumped on her bed, still and silent. He'd then placed a plastic bag over her head and tied it in place with a cable. Over the next few weeks, friends of Judith became concerned that she hadn't been seen, and Dale made excuse after excuse as to why they hadn't seen her, saying that she was in hospital, visiting a friend, or self-isolating with COVID. But eventually the police were called, and they went round to Dale and Judith's in late January. They were fobbed off by Dale, saying that his mother was very ill in bed and she was self-isolating. Less than a month later, on February 20th, the police were called again, and they again visited, but this time Dale wasn't in. So they looked through a window and they saw Judith's body. She was partially decomposed, kneeling on the floor with her right arm on the bed. There was blood on the bed and a bloodied hammer on the floor. Just a few hours later, Dale actually handed himself into police. However, when questioned, he answered no comment to every single question, and he refused to give up his login information for his social media accounts. When police looked into Dale and Judith's finances, they discovered that Dale had transferred money multiple times from his mother's bank account to his own, totaling £3,000. He'd then withdrawn the money in cash to fund his drug habit. He'd then sat night after night using those drugs, completely unfazed that his mother's decomposing body was in the next room. At Dale's trial, his cousin, Judith's niece, read out a statement that said, "We'll never understand why he did this. Dale was Judith's life and the person that she loved the most." Dale pleaded guilty in August 2021, and he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 21 years and 6 months.
This is one of the most unsettling missing persons cases ever. This is Brandon Swanson, and on May 14th, 2008, he disappeared. And to this day, he has never been seen or found, not even a trace of him. Brandon Swanson was from Southwest Minnesota, and he graduated high school and was also enrolled into college. And on May 14th, 2008, he was celebrating the end of the academic year with some friends. And just before midnight that night, Brandon left the party that he was at and started to make the 30-mile drive home. But just before 2 a.m., he called his parents and said that he'd driven his car off the road into a ditch. He told them it was impossible for him to get it out of the ditch and that they needed to come and pick him up. This right here is the drive Brandon would have been making home that night. And as you can see, it's a pretty easy drive. There's no turns, there's really no twists or anything. So after hearing this from Brandon, his parents took off in their own pickup and began to drive towards his direction. So Brandon and his parents were on the phone almost the entire time that he was waiting for them. Their calls dropped a couple of times, but he was still talking to them, saying he was staying by his car. Brandon even told them that he was flashing his lights on and off so that they could see him. But him and his parents never came across each other. He never saw them drive by, and they never saw him. So after a little bit, Brandon said that he saw lights from a town about 7 miles ahead of him. So he told his parents that he was going to walk there, and the town's name was Lind. And Brandon said he would go into town and sit at a small bar in the parking lot, waiting for them to pick him up. So his dad, Brian, immediately began driving towards Lind. And he was talking to his son the entire time during the drive. But this is when it gets extremely crazy. 47 minutes into the phone call, something bizarre happens. As Brandon is making the walk to the small town of Lynn, he suddenly screams out, "Oh shit," and interrupts what he was saying, and immediately his end of the line goes silent. His parents then start worrying, asking Brandon, "What was that? What does that mean?" But they hear nothing. It's complete silence. After the phone was silent for a long period of time, his parents hung up the phone and tried to call back. But he never answered. That was the last time he was ever seen or heard from. Search teams then searched the entire area and dogs were brought out and tons of people were looking for Brandon. But no trace of him was ever officially found. But a team of dogs picked up a scent trail that was 3 miles long that led them to an abandoned farm, and then entered a river and got out on the other side. Many people believe that Brandon drowned, but that would make no sense. That his scent trail continued through the river and then onto the other side of the river, and then all the way up to a gravel road where it just stopped. Dogs in later years also picked up scents of human remains in the area, but no trace of Brandon was ever found. Not a piece of clothing, not a fiber of hair, nothing. What makes this case so bizarre is why did Brandon scream out "oh shit" before his phone call went silent? His parents didn't hear the sound of a struggle, they didn't hear the sound of anything, it just went silent. It's like he literally vanished into thin air. To this day, there is no evidence at all that points anybody in any direction as to what happened to Brandon. Let me know your thoughts on this because this is absolutely mind-blowing.
There is such a horrific backstory to this picture. This was just moments before this man was brutally murdered by the woman behind the camera. After her arrest, she said it was self-defense, but if you've seen the crime scene photos for this case, you will know that that's definitely not true. In 2006, Travis Alexander met his killer Jodi Arias at a conference in Las Vegas. Jodi was beautiful, blonde and carefree, and the two of them had an instant connection. Jodi was an aspiring photographer, while Travis was a salesman and a devout Mormon. The two of them soon hit it off and began dating, although they lived in separate states, so it was somewhat of a casual, long-distance relationship, with both of them travelling back and forth to visit each other. Travis was absolutely infatuated with Jodi, but right from the start of the relationship, Travis's friends noticed a bunch of red flags and they became really worried about Travis. The relationship soon became toxic and quite violent, and after 5 months, Travis broke it off. A few weeks passed and then out of the blue, Jodi moved to Mesa, Arizona, where Travis lived, and she just started showing up at his house unannounced. She actually managed to gain entry a couple of times through the garage door, and she just let herself into his house. At first, Travis was angry about this, but she soon won him round and they'd often become intimate. Although Travis was now seeing another woman called Lisa, and Jodi didn't like this one bit. She'd often turn up at Lisa's house late at night and knock on the door and then run away to terrify Lisa. In June 2008, Travis had been scheduled to attend a conference in Mexico, but he never arrived. His friends became concerned when they couldn't reach him, and after 5 days, they decided to go around to his house and they let themselves in with a spare key. Nothing could have prepared them for what they found in Travis's home. The crime scene photos, as well as Travis's autopsy photos, are freely available on the internet, but be warned before you go searching for them, you will need an extremely strong stomach. After finding pools of blood in Travis's bedroom, Travis's friends went into his bathroom and they found him slumped on the floor of his shower cubicle. His head was tilted to one side and Jodi had almost cut it clean off. She had slashed through his jugular, his carotid artery and his windpipe. He also had 30 stab wounds in his back, multiple defence wounds on his hands and arms, and he'd also been shot in the head, although it was determined that this gunshot had happened after he'd died. This photo was taken by Jodi just moments before she attacked him in his shower. Jodi was tracked down and arrested, and strangely she dyed her hair from bright blonde to dark brown. She denied any involvement at first, but she soon admitted that it was her that had killed Travis, although she said that she'd done it in self-defense. Faced with the evidence and after multiple mistrials, retrials and appeals, a judge found Jodi guilty of first-degree murder. They actually deadlocked on the death penalty, so the judge had a choice. They could either sentence Jodi to life with a minimum of 25 years or life without parole. And on the 13th of April 2015, almost 7 years after Travis's death, Jodi was sentenced to life without parole.
This is one of those cases that doesn't sit right with me. This is Dorothy Jane Scott. She was murdered in the 1980s, and for years, the killer tormented her family with phantom phone calls. And to this day, they are still out there somewhere. So let's dive into the story. So the story of Dorothy's disappearance is really strange. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two of her friends to the hospital, as one of them had been bitten by a spider that night. So at the end of the hospital visit, while they were waiting to get a prescription filled, Dorothy Jane walked to go grab her car and bring it up so that the two friends could meet her outside. And once they were outside, the friends saw Dorothy's car coming towards them, but it quickly sped off and left them there. Now, they couldn't see who exactly was in the car, who was driving, because the headlights blinded them, but in a few hours, they reported her missing because they couldn't get in contact with Dorothy. And she would be missing for years. So in the months leading up to her murder, Dorothy had acquired a stalker. She had been receiving phone calls at work from a strange, unidentified male caller. And on these phone calls, this guy would tell her how much he loved her, and then he would state that he intended on killing her soon. One day, this phantom man even told Dorothy to go outside because he left a surprise on her car, and when she went outside to look, there was a single dead rose on her windshield, which is very creepy. On one of these particularly gruesome phone calls, the caller even stated that he planned on abducting Dorothy and chopping her up into little bits so that no one would ever find her. So these phone calls obviously terrified Dorothy, and in the week leading up to her disappearance, she started taking karate lessons. Okay, so let's flash back to the night that Dorothy disappeared. Remember, her friends were waiting for her outside of the hospital when they saw her car speed by them, but they couldn't see who was inside the vehicle. At around 4:30 a.m. that morning, 5 hours or so after they saw her car speeding away, the car was found abandoned in an alleyway 10 miles from the hospital, and it was on fire, which torched all evidence that could have been in the vehicle. So Dorothy would be missing for years, 4 years in fact. But it only took 1 week after her disappearance for the killer to start calling her own parents. So about every Wednesday afternoon for a period after Dorothy went missing, this caller would call her parents and say the strangest things. He would tell them things like, "I have her." He would also claim that he was the one who killed Dorothy. He was basically tormenting her parents and saying that he knows exactly where she is and what had happened, but he was never going to tell them. Now, 4 years later, this was going on for 4 years, in April of 1984, this caller once again called Dorothy's family, but instead of her mom picking up the phone that night, her dad did. And after her dad picked up the phone calls completely stopped. That is, until a few months later. Now, in August of 1984, a construction worker would come across a set of bones that belonged to a human and a dog. And those bones were eventually revealed to be those of Dorothy's. And immediately after her remains were found, the caller once again began to call her parents. This time, the police installed a recorder that bugged the family's phones. They were trying to get this guy's voice on recording and trace the phone calls, but the calls were never long enough for them to trace, and they still had no idea who this guy was. To this day, authorities still don't know how Dorothy died. And even though the phone calls eventually stopped, the killer's never been brought to justice. Now, the only suspect that's ever emerged in this case still doesn't have a name. It's the same guy that called, obviously, Dorothy's family, but it was a man who called a local newspaper just a few days after Dorothy went missing. And on this phone call, this guy said that he loved Dorothy, she had been cheating on him, and that he was the one who killed her. So that means that to this day, this killer is probably still out there somewhere, and they've never been brought to justice. This crime occurred over 40 years ago. There are no leads, and I don't think that this is a case that will ever be solved. If this killer dies, I'm sure that they're going to take this secret to the grave with them.